Excellent. So good afternoon or welcome everyone to our weekly call. Hope you all had a great weekend. Let me share my screen in a moment, proving I can't easily multitask, which is one of those things. So this week we've got sort of two main topics of conversation. First is as we approach the IETF 113, I'm just going to sort of walk through some of the agenda items that caught my eye. Just talk about those to save you the trouble of going through the agenda if you haven't done so already. But equally, anyone that has gone through the agenda and has got any other sort of suggestions, feel free to contribute those as we walk through. And then after that, I'm going to just give you a brief sort of highlights of a internet draft, which I and my two co-authors, Paul Vixie, who many of you know, and Dave Wright, who's a sort of a thought leader in the sort of child sort of safety space. We co-authored a paper, and I'll talk about that some as well, and then we'll probably cover a few other things, and plus anything that anyone else wants to talk about this week. So without further ado, let me firstly share my screen, which I hope you can all now see. I realise I put the agenda in there, which I've just said, so I'll skip over that. And I also realise I forgot to change the transition. I will do that before the next call. Apologies for whoever it was that pointed out that didn't work very well on Zoom. Okay, so as I say, these are some things that I've noted in going through the IETF 113 agenda. So I'm just going to sort of highlight these, but as I go through, if people have spotted other interesting sessions that run at the same time, please call those out as we do so. So starting with Monday, and I should say most of the days run over 3 sessions, 1 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. So it's slightly different from the last few all virtual IETFs, that there is a morning rather than afternoon start to the workshops. So to talk about those first, on the Monday, the morning session, the 2 topics of interest are dispatch. And the reason I've noted that one down is, amongst other things on the agenda for the dispatch session, is a paper proposing a well-known URI for publishing ECH config list values. So it's to do with the ECH standard, which, given that I've just sort of co-authored a paper about ECH, it seemed entirely reasonable to me that that would be of interest. For those of you that are not so much into ECH, at the same time as the dispatch session, you'll find there's a workshop for the open specification for pretty good privacy working group, which includes a paper from Murray Nodal with a definition on end-to-end encryption, which is certainly worth a look. I've seen a sort of few versions of that draft, and I think that's a subject it's worth paying attention to. After that, in the afternoon, in afternoon session 1, the PEARG, or Privacy Enhancements and Assessments Research Group, has its session, and one of the papers being presented is on GDPR and network privacy, which again, that attracted my attention. There are clearly other topics on the agenda, but that stood out for me. And then finally, the afternoon on Monday is the sort of Gen Dispatch session, which doesn't yet have an agenda, as well as the mask working group has got a session, which the main reason I put that in is I know when we went through the agenda for IETF 112, I think it was Ralph sort of highlighted mask as being of interest, so I thought I would at least sort of point out when that is taking place this time. The other thing probably worth saying, just in general comment, not all the working groups have got agendas yet. So some of them, like Gen Dispatch, I put down because there's usually something interesting in them, but at this stage it's not published. So that's really just me taking a punt at the moment, absent a working group agenda. And as I go through these, do interrupt me should you want to highlight something that I've overlooked. So either just put it in the chat or raise your virtual hand and I will pause. Otherwise, rolling through into Tuesday in the morning, DNS Ops has got quite a busy agenda, including a number of sessions on DNSSEC, as well as a paper entitled Expressing QoS Requirements in DNS Queries, which I think is certainly worth a look. There were a few other papers on other topics as well. So as always with DNS Ops, there's quite a busy agenda. I think it runs over 2 sessions. It normally does, but now I come to think of it, I may not have noted down when the second DNS Ops session is.
I think there is a second one. At least when I looked on the agenda, there was only 1 session.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it wasn't me missing it then, Brett, because there is the last few meetings.
There's usually 2, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in that case, I'm surprised because it looked like there's a lot of content in there. I'm surprised they didn't want to spread it over 2, but yeah, maybe there's a reason for that. Okay. I didn't see anything of immediate interest to me for the first afternoon session, and noted for the second afternoon session a combination of SEC Dispatch and the IETF open meeting. Normally, there's what certainly the last few meetings that the IETF open has been well worth attending. The reason I put SEC Dispatch in there for no other reason, if you will, than the draft paper I'm going to talk about in a minute. We've pitched towards SEC Dispatch, but the agenda is not finalised yet, so I have no idea whether.
So I didn't, as the chair, I haven't seen that yet, and I will catch back up on it. I only saw 2 proposals, and I think there'll be interesting discussions there. One from Hank that more feedback on would be great. I'm going to post my own review. This is Kathleen Moriarty.
Yeah, please, Kathleen. Yeah, I think you're far better qualified to talk about SEC Dispatch than I am, so please do go on.
Yeah, I've just been too busy. So, and I think my co-chairs have as well, but minimally tomorrow afternoon, I'll pull that all together because I have something due tomorrow.
Yeah, perfect.
But it should be good.
Yeah, the paper I mentioned, by the way, I think I sent it to the SEC Dispatch chairs email, whatever that is. I can't remember now, but I think I've seen a couple mentioned in the mailing list as well, people sort of suggesting they may have papers, but they may be the 2 that you mentioned already. I can't remember.
Okay, I'll look for that. Thank you.
But if we have a slot, I will try and entice Paul Vixie to join us, because Paul will be by far the more authoritative of the co-authors to present on it if I can get him to come on. But I'm sure if he does that, I'm sure he'd be doing it remotely, whereas I'll be in Vienna for the week. Anyway, so yes, SEC Dispatch sounds like there'd be some material well worth seeing in any case. So make a note of that for your diaries, and that will take us through to Wednesday. So Wednesday morning, there's the TLS working group, which includes an ECH update. So that I think is always of interest, as that particular standard evolves. And at the same time, measurement analysis for protocols as MAPRG, a research group, I think its full name is, and I don't think they've got the agenda published for that yet, so that I've just put that in as a sort of holding note for the moment, just to be aware of that. But I think the outstanding
they got the agenda published and lots of DNS in there.
Thank you, Ralph. That may well have just come on. Yeah. I didn't see anything of immediate interest for the first afternoon session on the agenda when I looked through it, but I did note that the Oblivious HTTP application intermediation, or OHI, working group takes place later in the afternoon in the second session. And I definitely think that will be worth people attending if you can. And then at the end of Wednesday, there's a third afternoon session. It's the only day where that happens, which is the IETF plenary, which if your diaries allow, is also definitely worth attending. Obviously, if you're in Vienna, you may as well, because that's the only thing on the agenda then. So will be worth doing anyway. So rolling into Thursday, then in the morning, you've got the security area open meeting taking place, followed by session 1 in the afternoon, the IAB open meeting, which includes a slot on decentralization, which I'd always commend people pay attention to. But in parallel with that is the Medinas working group, which is also usually of interest, because they're talking about MAC randomization, which I know is a topic of interest to a fair number of you. So that's, I think there's 2 very good sessions there, which just happen to be overlapping. And then so the second afternoon slot on Wednesday, we've got the Adaptive DNS Discovery Working Group, which I'll sort of put the agenda for that up in a moment, which I think will be the principal attraction for most of us. In the unlikely event anyone doesn't want to attend that, the other one that stood out for me was the Stay Home Meet Only Online Working Group, which happens to be running at the same time, but I'll be surprised if there are many people on this call that won't gravitate towards the ADD working group for Thursday afternoon. And then finally on Friday, there's just 2 slots. There's a morning session and then early afternoon session before the meeting wraps up. I didn't again see anything that immediately jumped out at me for the Friday morning, but did note that
so Friday morning there is the DANCE, Day Authenticated for Network Clients Everywhere session that is probably of interest.
Okay, fair enough. I'll add that to this list then, Ralph, after the call. Let's make a note of that. And then in the afternoon, you'll see there's a deprived meeting, which again is always got good content in and quite a full agenda, as well as a privacy preserving measurement working group meeting, which is well worth your while either attending or watching the recording of, because this is I think intended to come up with a method to well, my loose interpretation of it, make the sort of the ad funding model continue to work, which you may tell I have my doubts about it, but because of that, I think it's well worth paying attention to see how that evolves. Now, just quickly going back to the ADD session, if I just put the agenda up on the screen. You'll see there are 4 papers listed, or 4 topics listed for this under the drafts session. So there's a continuation of the discussion on the split horizon proposals. So Turu will be talking about that. He's also got network policy to use network designated DNS resolvers, followed by DNS resolver information. So Turu is going to be quite busy in the ADD working group. And then Ben is sort of presenting his paper on discovery of designated resolvers in the presence of legacy forwarders. So not the shortest of titles, but I think it's pretty descriptive what it's about. And you'll find, I think, papers for all of those on the ADD working group page, which is linked to at the top. I also noted that, as you'll see further up that slide, it says the interim session times are from 3:15 to 4:30 in the afternoon UTC for the ADD session, and that it will be preceded by 45 minutes worth of deprive sort of content. I don't think Glenn or Lawrence are on. I can't see them on. No, otherwise I would have just got them to elaborate on that. But it would appear that deprive need a bit more time, and therefore are using part of the slot to cover the balance of the sort of deprive material, given, as I said, that the agenda for deprive is content rich. So if you jump on that session at 2:30, you may find it's deprive first, followed by ADD. I'm not sure if they're going to share the same link to the session for those of you attending remotely, or if they're going to put two links up in that time slot so that people get into the right session. So that would be useful to clarify, but I guess we have to wait and see. Those of us who are there in person, I have no idea how that's going to work, whether they'll use the same room for both or what, but we'll find out. So that's everything that I noted. I've written down, Ralph, your point about dance. I don't know if anybody else has anything else that they thought would be worthwhile. I'll give you a moment to unmute if you do indeed have something else that you wish to highlight from the session. Taking silence as possibly not. If you do suddenly think of something in the next little while, then pop it in the chat or raise your hand, and we can come back to it. In which case, let me then switch topics and talk briefly about the internet draft that I mentioned earlier. So I just move that elsewhere on my screen so it works. Right, so I'm going to just share this screen, and what I'll do, I'll put it on there, and then I will enlarge it so it's a bit more legible, because otherwise you'll probably not be able to read it except as a sight test. So hopefully that's sufficiently large that people can see the text okay. So the paper that I mentioned earlier, but may or may not appear on the SEC dispatch agenda, basically, a number of us had a conversation about the need to have a stronger sort of input from end users into some of the standards discussions, because in some of them, the sort of voice of the end user seems to be extremely faint, if present at all. So we took a look at the ECH standard, and noted in there that there's very little reference to how implementation of ECH may impact on end users. So if I just scroll down here a little, you'll see that in essence what we've done is to just highlight the lack of that sort of information, and talk about a number of contexts where it could be quite impactful, the introduction of ECH. So the intent is to highlight that and ensure that it's at least made aware, people are made aware of it. And in our view, this is quite, this is entirely consistent with some of the thinking behind RFC 8890, which the IB put forward, I think probably a couple of years ago now. The internet is for end users, so we want to sort of strengthen the sort of input on impacts on end users, and encourage that to be taken into account when new proposals are developed. So when we looked at the documentation for ECH, there is an RFC, which is RFC 8404, which talked about the sort of relevance of encrypting the SNI data, but made some fairly modest, sorry, RFC 8744, get my RFCs mixed up, made some fairly modest observations about how the end users will be impacted. So I'm looking towards section sort of 2 on the screen there, just work towards the top. So having noted that there's not a lot of substance in that RFC, that's really the gap that we're trying to fill. But by not being so dismissive of the so-called unanticipated usage of SNI data, which is what RFC 8744 refers to, but to actually sort of be more positive about how it is used, and therefore what is the impact of it being unavailable because of the introduction of ECH, what that impact would be. So we firstly look at the impact in the education sector, partly because certainly at least in the US and the UK, schools do have an interest in doing content filtering. In the UK, there's an obligation for schools to do that. In the US, there's certainly strong motivation to do that if schools want to qualify to receive certain federal funding. So that's a qualification requirement. They don't have to do it, but if they want to get that funding, it is necessary. More importantly, the content filtering that schools use, certainly some of it does rely on SNI data. So clearly removing the SNI data makes it very difficult to do the content filtering. And what we've sort of noted in following this through is, whilst there are mitigations to counteract the loss of the SNI data, they're mainly out of either the budgetary reach or the operational capabilities of many schools. So the fact that options exist in theory doesn't necessarily mean that they're practical. And there's more narrative on that there. We also just touch on sort of the application of transparent proxies before looking into the implications for the loss of SNI in enterprises, where some enterprises do have certainly obligations on compliance, where they have to track inbound and outbound communications. Anything which obscures that will be highly problematic. And of course, oh, go on. Is that Kathleen? Yes, I think it was.
Yes. The filtering services also have used in the past the certificate as a more reliable measure than SNI. And so that's no longer visible. So it's the combination, and the argument on the IETF side is they don't really care because that's censorship.
Yes. And obviously people are entitled to their views on censorship, but that doesn't mean that they're not it's not a requirement in some contexts.
I'm in agreement. I don't want malware downloaded onto systems or pornography being shown in schools. So
Yeah,
it's a really hard problem.
yes, which is, to be honest, Kathleen, that's why we thought it was worth putting in a draft to highlight the issue, because it'd be ironic if a solution that was intended to enhance privacy, in fact, significantly enlarged the attack surface and made it much easier for malware to degrade privacy. And I'm not sure that's been fully addressed in the current discussion, certainly around ECH. I'm not sure about some of the other.
So yeah, it's certainly not. It might be worth a separate brainstorming session because new arguments would be needed to have any level of convincing happen. And then the draft should also cover the use of the certificate in this type of screening.
Yeah. And it is a draft, so that's, yeah, the intent of putting it forward is to also engage others that have an interest to provide additional input, not least of which, so that's a timely reference to the fact that if I look on the threat detection section where we've sort of mentioned both RC 8404, which if I recall you're a co-author of, I think, as well as there's a new draft, indicators of compromise, which both in different ways sort of talk to the importance of having multiple signals to help identify the existence of a malware, or help to ensure it doesn't become effective. So yeah, and then we just touch on some potential mitigations. The one thing that we have highlighted is, in our view, on security considerations, we do believe that if you encrypt SNI data, it does, because of the challenges it poses to threat detection, that the security considerations for the current ECH draft need to take into account the impact on threat detection, and currently they don't. So our view is that that's a shortcoming which should be addressed in the ECH draft. But anyway, that's a very rapid to just sort of run through some of the key points in that document, and completely accept, Kathleen, your point about certificates. That's possibly an area where we think that takes things beyond, for example, the capabilities of schools, or at least most schools, because certainly the schools I know of, their IT capability is not comparable to that of an enterprise, let's put it that way. So imposing enterprise requirements on them is going to make it difficult for them to comply with sort of properly, and that's before you consider the budgetary implications. But anyway, that's a sort of quick run through the draft. If anyone else has got any comments, I'll pause for a moment to see if you have any input. Welcome. And I should also, I'll just put a link in the chat to the document so you can read it at a more leisurely pace. So that's there now. For those of you watching the recording, I'll put a link in the notes as well. So I'm not seeing anyone immediately jumping in with any comments, but at least, Kathleen, that will give you an insight into what we wanted to talk to should we be able to have a slot on the SEC dispatch working group, so that'll save you having to read the paper to get the gist of it.
Okay, and I'd be happy to talk offline in advance to help increase your success of that discussion.
Surely, yeah. Well, I'd be foolish to say no to that. Out of interest, will either you or any of the other co-chairs be at the meeting in Vienna, or are you attending remotely? Do you happen to know?
I will be remote, and for SEC dispatch, I have not heard from my other two co-chairs, so I'm not sure what their plans are.
Yeah, I mean, I can easily look on the registration list. I was just curious if you happen to know, but yeah, fine. I'll maybe get in touch separately. We can have a chat.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, right, in that case, let me move on. So I'll stop sharing that. But if anyone has any sort of comments offline that you want to share, they'll be certainly well received. So thank you in advance if you do have those. Right, so I'm just going to flip back to the slides for a few minutes. Firstly, just to highlight some recent developments which may be of interest, which I put the weekly headlines this week, but there was 3 which I thought were well worth drawing to your attention. One is that Cloudflare have implemented DDR support. So they've sort of joined the existing announcements from Cisco and Quad9 in implementing DDR support, at least for the time being. So that's on the Cloudflare CDN. And more details in the link to their blog announcement that you can see on the screen. Also, the ICANN Office of the CTO published a report into DNS resolution in the EU. So there's a link there. And on the screen, you'll see I put in an additional link to a pretty recent report from ENISA. I think that's only a couple of months old, covering some of the same area. So there's sort of 2 reports, so you can sort of cross compare if that's a topic of interest to you. And then there's the 3rd one, which some of you on the call may have more knowledge of than me, which is there's a report, I think it was over the weekend actually, about British, it was titled British Telcos Put Private Relay in the Spotlight. I think it's more accurately, it's British mobile operators through the Mobile UK Industry Association have submitted a report to the UK's Competition and Markets Authority. That's one of the antitrust regulators, giving their views on some of the obviously negative impacts in their eyes caused by the introduction of private relay. So anyone that's got an interest in private relay, I think that would be sort of worth reading. The Mac Rumors story that I put the link to there gives an overview, but it also includes a link to the Mobile UK report itself, so you can actually see the source material that prompted the story. And then finally, for me at least, briefly, a reminder: we don't have a call next week because we'll be busy with IETF 113. So we can't be in 2 places at once. Following week, we'll spend some time, I'm sure, just talking about some of the sort of key points arising from IETF, as well as all things being equal, Andrei Meshkov should be with us to share learnings from AgGuard's sort of implementation of support for doc, probably now about 15 months ago. So he's got quite a lot of learning in the intervening period, which he's happy to share with us. I'll probably confirm that with Andrei next week, because given events in Ukraine and Russia, as you might imagine, he's been pretty busy with other things. So I will sort of just check in with him next week to see if he's still able to do that then. So I'll confirm that at some point through the week. Then Monday the 4th, Rishabh Chabra is going to talk about measuring the performance of Doe, which will be of interest to people. And then you'll see we've got a couple of topics where I still haven't finalised the timings, but they'll be in the following weeks, probably through April.
Hi, Andrew.
Yeah, please jump in.
So just a quick question about the shared learnings of the deployment of encrypted DNS resolvers. Is it me, or has that changed slightly? I thought it was just Doe resolvers you were interested in before.
I don't think I've changed the word. If I have, it's entirely unintentional. It will probably be mainly focused on Doe, I suspect, in reality, Peter, but there's no reason to limit it to Doe.
Okay. And it's going to be a panel, so just
that's the intent. I mean, the idea was, I mean, we did this probably about a year ago.
okay.
Was simply to gather a few people that have implemented sort of resolvers, just to sort of share what they've sort of learned over sort of recent times, which could be anything from what the sort of how the traffic sort of balance has changed over that period, any operational learnings, etc.
Great. Okay.
So the intent in having a panel was, rather than any one person feeling under pressure to come up with everything, so let's make it more of a conversation, because there may be some differences in experiences between people.
Great. Thank you.
So I think that was everything from me this week. So let me stop talking there and just ask us anything anyone else has spotted through this week, or anything that's on your mind that you want to share at the moment. So if you do, if you need to, put it in the chat, or equally just unmute and you can just say it out loud. I'll give you a minute or two just to think if you have anything. Equally, for those of you that have implemented support for encrypted DNS over the last couple of years or so, if you want to be involved in that panel, please let me know. And Peter already, I think, has volunteered one of your colleagues, Peter, to do that in principle.
He's on the call today, so I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
you confirmed he was definitely going to do it.
That's right, 100%.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, there he is.
Even if you're on holiday, Pete, apparently you're going to ring in regardless.
Well, it is my birthday's around this time, so I might not be able to make it, but I think. Yeah, but the other Peter is going to be helping out. So. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'm not seeing anything from anyone else at the moment. So I'm guessing we're probably done this week. So if that's the case, thanks all for your time. Hopefully some of you will appear in Vienna next week. If you do, it'd be fantastic to catch up, perhaps over a beer or two, which is always a good thing in my view. But if not, have a fantastic week anyway, and we'll sort of catch up in 2 weeks' time, remembering no call next week because it is IETF 113. So thanks everyone, speak to you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Andrew.
Bye all.
Bye. Cheers, everyone.